Bonsoir à toutes et à tous, bienvenue à la Fondation Henri Cartier-Bresson. Je suis Chloé Remman, je suis la responsable de la librairie et des publics à la Fondation et nous sommes très heureux de vous accueillir ce soir pour notre 7e feuilletage avec Christian Patterson. Pour celles et ceux qui ne seraient pas encore familiers avec le format du feuilletage, c'est un format d'événement qu'on a créé à la Fondation en juin 2023 et durant lequel on invite un artiste ou une artiste à venir présenter son projet en feuilletant les pages de son livre. Pour ce 7e feuilletage, donc Christian Patterson vient nous présenter en exclusivité et en avant-première son livre Gong Co. On est très heureux que Christian ait accepté. Et avant de lui laisser la parole, je vais juste le présenter brièvement. Donc Christian Patterson est né à Fond-du-Lac, dans le Wisconsin. Il vit et travaille à New York. Il a exposé dans le monde entier et il a notamment publié 3 ouvrages qui ont marqué l'édition photographique de ces 15 dernières années. Il publie en 2008 Sound Affect chez Suddendorf. Ensuite, Redheaded Peckerwood par Mac en 2011, pour lequel il remporte le prix du livre d'auteur des rencontres d'Arles. Et Bottom of the Lake, publié par Koenig Books en 2015, qui est shortlisté pour le prix du livre Aperture. Donc, en 2015 également, Christian Patterson remporte le Grand Prix Images Vevey pour son projet Gong Co, que nous allons donc voir ce soir, qui sera ensuite exposé en 2016 à la Biennale Images Vevey, dans une installation immersive dans laquelle il va recréer l'épicerie, qui est le sujet du livre. Gong Co est un projet qui a débuté il y a 20 ans, lorsqu'en 2003, Christian Patterson découvre dans le Mississippi une épicerie familiale abandonnée. De 2013 à 2019, Christian Patterson a pu y accéder et y documente méticuleusement les objets et les détails figés dans le temps dans cette épicerie oubliée. Aujourd'hui, donc, Christian Patterson vient nous présenter en avant-première, comme je vous le disais, le livre tiré de ce projet, qui est une coédition entre Images Vevey et l'éditeur américain TBW Books. La sortie du livre officielle sera en novembre, mais là, exceptionnellement, on a reçu des copies qui seront en vente à l'issue du feuilletage et que Christian Patterson pourra signer à la librairie suite à la rencontre. So thank you, Christian, for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
And the floor is yours.
This is the first time that I'll be speaking about this work in actual book form. It's always been sort of dreamt book form, planned book form, but we're very lucky to have received 20 advance copies of the book just this afternoon here in Paris. And this is actually the first time that I'm seeing the dust jacket in this particular version myself. So I'm a little excited, but where to begin? This project began 20 years ago, and boy, it has layers. But let's start with the outside layer and the book object. The cover presents an image in halftone of the front of this grocery store, Gong Co. And as you can see, there are a few little pieces of, or images of pieces of tape. And the back cover has a table of numbers, the traces of a handprint, and a little sticker that says grocery. But these are really only the only clues we have. It all began, yes, as I said, about 20 years ago, in 2003. In 2002, the prior year, I had moved to Memphis, Tennessee to work closely with William Eggleston as his sort of second assistant an archivist, and I would spend a lot of my free time exploring Memphis, Tennessee and Mississippi, which is very close. And on one particular very hot summer day, I was driving south on Highway 61 to New Orleans and felt a little thirsty. And I thought that I saw an approaching town, maybe about a half mile off the road. And so I exited the highway and pulled into this little town. And that's where it all began. The book is, I've been saying, a sort of memento mori to this. A memento mori meaning sort of an acknowledgement of or reflection on death, the fact of life and death, as I have seen it or realized it in this small family-owned grocery store in the heart of the Mississippi Delta, a place that is, I think, very central to and crucial to America, both historically and even now today. It feels to me very much like for various reasons, various historical and cultural reasons, to be a sort of crucible of so much that is both good and bad and troubled with America. And so that, I think, is part of the context of this work, and it's very, I don't know, relatively cryptically alluded to here and there in the work and in the book. The book is, I would say, more than just a photography book. It contains photographs, monotypes, collages, and various elusive and, yes, at times cryptic print elements. So if we were to, let's say, turn the book, I'm not sure if you can see this, but there is some edge printing or foredge printing here that makes the book look sort of old and moldy, to indicate time. And I'm not sure to what extent some of these printed elements will be easy for you to see, but here on the page surface, there's some very light penciled marginalia, some notes. And it says, "To open a shop is easy, to keep it open is an art." And so from the very beginning, from the get-go, I'm conflating the idea of this grocery store and business with art. And it's not just art as we might first think of it, but again, to open a shop is easy, to keep it open is an art. And keeping it open is about the art of survival. You may also notice that the pages have a bit of an edge patina. There's a subtle yellowing and dirtying to the edges of the pages. Again, conveying age and time. And in a few of my books, I've approached them and their sequencing in a somewhat cinematic way. And so here we have our first title, my name, and a little red ribbon or a bow, thinking about the book as a gift. The first image is a sort of a cliche image. It's, but that's intentional. It's immediately putting us on the ground in this place, in this part of the world, in this part of America, Mississippi, cotton fields. And unlike some of my other books, the sequence of images is actually very linear. You're basically riding along with me as I enter this place, this town. And here I more clearly spell it out. One Mississippi. And I'm not sure if that's something that means the same thing to you, but in America, growing up, I would, and I know that a lot of children did, maybe perhaps still do, they would count by saying 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. It was a way of marking time. Because it takes about a second to say that. And as we go, we're beginning to see some signs of life. Or perhaps a former life, a sort of faded America. There are a few things as American as Coca-Cola. And again, touching on the making of the book and the sequencing of the images, there are a few moments in the book where the images on subsequent pages are very close to one another, and so here it's this wall and then a detail of the wall. And I won't remember and I won't be able to point out all of the marginalia, and I don't know that you'll be able to see it. It's printing this book, that was probably one of the biggest challenges. The photographs looked beautiful instantly, but hitting this very specific target of having ink on the page that could be seen but easily not seen or missed was a very specific target to hit, and I'm quite happy with the result. But right here it says see, not the letter C, but to see with your eyes. And right here it says remember. When you see, you remember. And as I said, there are some elusive images and words and phrases in this book. And here, I'm seeing and thinking about Mississippi and America and history and context, because what we have in this picture are two separate but equal things. And that's a phrase, separate but equal, that sort of calls back to a very divisive time, a racially divisive time in America, even more so than it is today. Little interesting piece of photographic history or lineage here is that many people who know anything about photography, photographic history, American photography, you're familiar with the Farm Security Administration, Dorothea Lange, Russell Lee, and some of the other photographers who worked for that government organization in the 30s, 40s. And this building and some others that appear at the beginning of the book were photographed by the FSA when they visited Marigold, Mississippi, this town, and the surrounding area. They were there to photograph sunflower plantation, a cotton plantation. And again, getting closer. And here, in this last image of this roughly 30-page prologue to the book, again, thinking cinematically, like the opening scene of a movie. You walk into a theater, the lights dim, everything goes dark, and you're in it. The movie begins, and then perhaps you see the title. But here, in this last image, in this reflection in this window that's cracked, I think there's a little bullet hole here, you see the words, the gong. And so this is very much the experience that I had when I first discovered this place and just discovered this store that was set me off on a 20-year journey and struggle. I saw this reflection in the window, and I thought, ooh, what's that? And I turned around, and that's where it all began. Here's where we were. We walk underneath this very large oak tree in the center of town, just over this rise in the road where railroad tracks had been. And somewhere here, it says, the end of the beginning. And now we've arrived at our subject, the Gong Co. And here it says, store, S-T-O-R-E, store E. This is the story. Little wordplay. A sign with layers. Anything and everything. All day, every day. A grocery store is, we take it for granted, but it's this expected place of abundance where we can always go and find what we need. A rotten apple, perhaps a bit of foreshadowing. Some of the surfaces and details that I was encountering as I found my way through the street, along the sidewalk, and to this place. Newspapers covering a closed storefront window, light shining through. Here it says liberty. Liberty rolls back. Liberty rolls back prices. But sometimes we find new meaning in these things. Liberty rolls back. Are we going back? The first instance of this particular image type, which recurs from time to time throughout the book, a disembodied hand, gesturing, reaching. A customer enters. And doors play I think a very obvious but helpful role in this book as passages or thresholds into new spaces, new layers. Here it says going out of business. And when I first encountered this store and I first saw this sign hanging in the window, I had no idea how the meaning of that phrase would change for me as I continued to visit and document and respond to this place over time. But again, a door, like a threshold, and walking into this door, there were some bells hanging there, and when the screen door gently slammed behind me, it rang those bells, and the bells further signaled that crossing of a threshold into a different space. And in this case, it almost felt like a different time, and a place that had its own atmosphere. And the bells are, I think, from some sort of holiday decoration from around the time of Christmas or New Year's. And the New Year is always a time when things end and things begin. I remember I don't know if any of you have seen this here, maybe they show it in France, but there's this Frosty the Snowman cartoon that plays in America around the holidays. And do you know Frosty the Snowman? He's a snowman, and he's magic, because when the children roll the snow up and they build the snowman, and they start to decorate him, and they give him a pipe, and then they put a magician's top hat on Frosty the Snowman. The snowman magically comes to life, and he says, "Happy birthday," which is and if the hat blows off, then he's no longer alive anymore. I think that's the way it works. But I always think of that, like Happy Birthday, Happy New Year, these passages in life. Now we're inside, looking out. Okay. Today is cash. To me, that means live in the moment, carpe diem kind of a thing. Do it now. You've got the money. You sort of have the money in your pocket. But don't ask for credit. Don't take anything for granted. You got to work hard. This is the first spread in the book that shows many of these pictures arranged in this way, sort of floated on the pages. And when I first walked into this place, it was dark, it was hot, it was smelly. It kind of smelled like an old wet book, which I think is kind of wonderful. And it immediately conveyed that I was in this different space and in this feeling like I was in this different time. I stole a few glances around the room, and I saw products sitting on the shelf that immediately I knew they must have been 30 or 40 years old. And I thought, well, this is interesting. What's going on here? And as I began to walk into the store and pass by the shelves and see more of the products and objects, these are some of the things I saw. Not just products, but random objects that didn't necessarily belong on the shelf of a grocery store. A grocery store that was really clearly headed towards its end. But we have key rings, a clock, a telephone, entrance, time, place, and the name of the store, again, is Gong Co. The book takes its title from the name of this place, a Chinese-American grocery store. And I found this, 2 or 3 of these brass trivets lying on a shelf, and this one says, good luck. So sort of wishing me luck on as I didn't know then, but sort of began this journey. Here's a rabbit's foot. Again, I don't know if this is a thing or not, but it was kind of a cruel thing for a very long time in America that children would have little chopped off rabbit's feet that it would often be on a keychain, and they would carry it with them as a good luck charm, a talisman for good luck. And here it says blessing, and here it says the opposite or the flip side of that curse. Something that you think could be a blessing might actually be a curse or some sort of burden to carry. And here it says, there's a license plate from an old car, and it says, Mississippi, the most lied about state in the nation. And this particular object has a very specific connection to a very specific dark story in America, one that I'm sure many of you are aware of, but in 1955, a young black boy named Emmett Till was kidnapped and brutally murdered, lynched in Mississippi. It became a very big sort of news story and media sensation and focal point or sort of spark, in a way, to the American civil rights struggle. That all happened, that story began in a grocery store about 20 or 30 miles outside the door of this particular one. And during the time that I was working on this project, I was able to locate one of these license plates. Again, it's just another piece of this bigger historical context. And I do want to differentiate between context and content of the book, because the book isn't really about that per se. It will become about something else, about the store and what the store signifies. This is actually the store the last time I saw it, in 2019. It didn't look quite this far gone the first time that I saw it. But it had a pink wall, and it had a green wall, and it had these old, creaky wooden floors. I remember walking into the store for the first time and feeling the floors begin to softly sag underneath my feet, and looking down and seeing holes in the floor, and looking up and seeing holes in the ceiling. Now and later, thinking about time. Now, here, then. a single rotting cherry inside a jar. Here it says, again, a little cryptic, dark wordplay. Here it says store, but it's spelled backwards, and it begins to say other things like he rots, or maybe the T falls away and it says eros, alluding to the cherry. There are various themes that are touched upon and float around inside this work. In some of my previous books, well, in Redheaded Peckerwood, I had actual tipped-in pieces of paper that you could touch and move. In the subsequent book, Bottom of the Lake, I had the appearance of various things on the page, even some sort of exaggerated shadows, and these elements began to take on less of an actual like physical and more of a sort of trompe-l'oeil kind of nature or effect. And I'm continuing to do that here, and it actually has actually freed me in a way from having to put them in certain places out of consideration for the physical structure, the signatures, and the binding of the book. The difference here is that I've never done this, but here for the first time, when these images of pieces of paper or other things appear, it's the turning of the page of the book that moves the imagined object. It's a nice little detail in the book. I don't know if there's only varnish on the shiny surfaces of those papers or objects. Anyone know Paul Otterbridge? That's definitely one of my faves and one of my influences while making this work. And this is perhaps one of the first images that was actually made in my studio. Over time, I acquired various products and objects and things from the store and transported them back to my studio in New York, where I would continue to make photographs when I wasn't in Mississippi. And by chance, there happened to be a newspaper on one of the shelves here, and it says, "Roaring to life," when in fact everything's dying. Meat, meal, and molasses. Just the basics. These are our baby bottle nipples. Here it says baby. And here's another image that was actually made in the studio. After I had visited the store a few times and made a few pictures, I contacted a friend who works in the as a scenic painter in the theater district in New York City, and I asked her if she could help me to create surfaces, old wooden shelves and walls with peeling paint, just small pieces of them that I could have in my studio, and that I could pull out and set up and continue to photograph some of the products and objects anytime that I like. That turned out to be one aspect of having a studio or doing certain things in the studio that was really valuable during the pandemic when I couldn't travel. I could be in Mississippi anytime that I like. And we're continuing a sort of circuitous path up and down the 3 aisles of the store. She, Mama. This always makes me think of Nick de Saint-Fal's Hun. Hun, is that what it's called? The pink wall. The color pink, in some cultures, signifies good luck, good fortune, and but here I saw something else, and so it says here, flesh. Crisis, doubt, beginning to see things fall apart. The green, new life, spring, nature, and here, earth. When I first encountered the store, this interesting old place full of interesting old stuff, as a photographer, I thought, oh, this could be a treasure trove, kind of a place full of these things that I could photograph. But as I began trying to make photographs of perhaps some of the details or some of the products and objects themselves, and not just the store or the store environment, I found it surprisingly challenging because they're products. They're designed, they're branded, they're labeled, they're meant to sit on a shelf and speak for themselves. And so to make a photograph of these things that actually had something to do or say or some value as an image turned out to be a much bigger challenge than I initially anticipated. And so, I arrived at various solutions to that. The images where hands are holding objects, a few of the arranged still lifes on the shelf, or the arrangement of objects in these old metal cigarette display racks is what they are. And here, another image type, which I feel is its own type, and I don't know. It's interesting to me because it's a very simple image. It's just an object sitting there in the sun on a piece of paper, but I love everything about it. I love the shadow and where it sits in relation to the paper. I love the way the paper occupies space within the frame, and the way that the paper begins to do almost as much as the object itself, the way that it interacts with the frame, where it sits in relation to things. I love this little piece of tape. And I don't know, sometimes when you're making pictures, you have these moments of, is it realization? It's just feel, where things feel right. And so I guess I was striving at times to make images that just had a certain gestalt. It felt like things belonged together in that way. Eat your heart out, Andreas Gursky, right? It's not the 99-cent store. This is the poor man's version of it. But looking across the store, the shelves, it's a much more flattened kind of picture. It doesn't have the same sense of depth. And here it says, shelf life. What is shelf life? That's a phrase that we use for the lifespan of things, the thinking of how long things will last before they're no good anymore, the expiration date. And it's written in a way where the H is sort of disappearing and it becomes self-life. I like words. I like wordplay. I like finding new meaning in these things. Skin whitener, new and old. Good fortune. A product called Quest. And we've arrived at another door. Has anyone seen Michael Snow's book, Cover to Really great, classic, highly conceptual photography book where the artist uses images to play with the pages and the sequencing of things. And the book actually has it doesn't have just one beginning or end. You can travel through it from front to back or back to front. And he uses doors, as I do here, as these markers or these passages. And here, we're turning the page and we're finally leaving the store and passing into another space. We've gone from the street to the store, and now we're going to be passing into the back rooms of the store, the office, the storeroom, and even a former residence. And once again, we have this sort of trompe-l'oeil, this piece of stained cardboard, water-damaged cardboard. And here it says, now earlier we saw end of the beginning, and here it says beginning of the end. And you may notice that there's a bit more of a presence now of this faux foxing on the surface of the page. And so as I'm watching this place decline over a long period of time and ultimately die, it closed in, I think it was maybe 10 years later in 2013, and I established contact with the subsequent owners of the property. The store was simply shuttered. Everything left inside on the shelves to rot as the ceiling was falling apart, as the rain was coming in. And I continued to access the space for another 5 or 6 years. And so as I'm watching this place go into decline, die, and continue to decay, over a 20-year period, I'm also, quite honestly, I'm maybe not going into decline, but I'm aging. Over this 20-year period, I'm aging into and through my 40s, reaching my midlife, and I'm thinking a lot more about my own life and my own mortality. And I wanted the book to reflect that, not only in relation to the store, but myself. And I wanted the book to look and feel like it was aging and decaying a bit along with the store. Here it says, mystery, my story. Time to save. And a lot of the language that appears in these word pieces, which are monoprints that I produced in my studio in the summer of 2020 during a very, very tumultuous time immediately preceding the last presidential election. It was very what's the word? not therapeutic, but I can't think of the word right now, but it was kind of helpful to me in a way to get some bad energy out and make these signs, these monoprints. And a lot of the language comes from grocery store advertisements. So, like for example, today is cash or time to save. Like, we're having a sale, come on in. But of course, within the context of what I see happening here and what I'm thinking about, it takes on other meaning. And so, again, when I first saw the store, interesting old place full of interesting old stuff. Here's a little bit of an homage to my friend Bill Eggleston, but now the ceiling's caving in. And so over time, the store became something more. It took on this other meaning. I mean, again, at the very beginning, to open a store is easy. To keep it open is an art, and it's about the art of survival. I began to see the store as a life, as a body. I mean, even the space itself, it's very easy to think of it as this corporeal thing. You enter it through this little door, this little orifice, and you walk inside, and it was dark, and it was hot, and it was a little smelly, and you know, as an artist, letting my mind go and wander into that, it did things. Thinking of here's my Walker Evans tenant farmer's kitchen. Long life. And seeing some signs of some more allusions to to sickness and death. A hot water bottle, kind of like a big red tongue. Worst pills, best pills. Taking myself apart. And we've entered, I failed to mention it, but we've entered the former residence. At one time, the family that owned the store lived in the back of the building. This was common practice. And I haven't touched on it, but there's a really fascinating and great American story to the story of Chinese Americans and how they arrived in America and the work that they did, building the Transcontinental Railroad, by and large settling on the West Coast. And then after the American Civil War, the black plantation workers were, let's say, I hesitate to say free, but they were free to leave the plantations and pursue other work, and landowners suddenly found themselves in dire need of cheap labor, replacement labor, and so they began recruiting male Chinese laborers to come to Mississippi and work on the plantations. And it was horrible, backbreaking, low-paying work, and they wanted to leave the plantations too, and there was a race-based, highly restrictive federal law in place in America at the time called the Chinese Exclusion Act. I mean, it really didn't hide from itself, Chinese exclusion. And it severely limited the number of Chinese people who could come to America, and it severely limited what they could do, the type of work they could do. But they were allowed to be merchants, and so by and large, they opened grocery stores. At one time, there were hundreds of Chinese American grocery stores dotting the Mississippi Delta landscape. Some of them still remain today. they are, for all practical purposes, what you might expect. They're fairly modernized. This particular one experienced a dramatic loss of business presumably in the late 1970s or early 1980s, when it seems that a lot of these products went on the shelves. And so it was a bit of just due to circumstance. Farms were becoming increasingly mechanized and taken over by corporations. People were moving or pursuing different types of work. Dollar General and Walmart moved into the area. They began taking away the business, and this place became an unintentional time capsule. So when I first saw it, that's what I saw, this time capsule of a place, this time warp of a place. And that interested me. Looking at work like this that relates so clearly to the past, a word that people often reach for is nostalgia. And it's fine. It's true. It's one of the impulses. It will all be over soon. But what people often fail to recognize is that the word nostalgia comes from the Greek nostos, which means home, and algos, which means pain. And I think people often forget about the pain or the yearning in part of nostalgia. And yeah, just lights out. Sick again. White bread. That's a phrase that people use to refer to white people, white Americans. It's, something getting old and stale, changing times, changing minds. And I'm just looking for a particular image if I can find it. This old Wonder Bread decal that was on a window when I first started the project, and then 20 years later when I was finishing it. Lost all of its color, nearly all of its color. And here we are again, going out of business. And I hope that by the end of the book you might see that and consider that differently. We're nearly there. I'm a little over time, but we're nearly there. And when you make a book of images, you usually have to find your way in and through, and you have to find your way out. And right now we're finding our way out. We're going. Going. We're watching the store disappear. And then here it says gone, which is something that I found, and it's something that I was thinking about, and it's it's a homophone. It's an almost homophone for Gong Co. And here's your closing title. All good things come to an end. You may have noticed the inner flap of the book has a sort of an inventory of the store. It lists all the different products or types of products that can be found in the store. And then here at the end of the book, there's an inventory of all of the images that and various things that I made that are contained in the book, a sort of an inventory for the book. And it's separated with some headings that also may shed some light on where you are or where you're going. Mississippi Highway 61, Marigold, the town, the street, the store, the office, the storeroom, the old home, going, gone. And I managed to find an old image of the store as it existed, again, presumably around the time when everything started going downhill, and when the products first went on, some of these products first went on the shelf. Bit of a shrine to the store, and here it says, "Yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, today is a gift." So again, going back to the little red ribbon at the beginning of the book, begin again. Because I think that's something that when we get to the end of, when we start to think about the end of things, or maybe the end of life, that's all we want to do, is begin again. Oh, I forgot to show you the cover. The cover of the book looks old and dirty and worn and stained. And yeah, is designed to work with the foredge wear and mold. It's meant to look. The book is meant to look like an object that could have come from this place, could have come from this world, could have been sitting on a wet shelf in the store and beginning to rot from the bottom up. And finally, this craft paper dust jacket, which resembles a grocery sack. It is the same sort of material as a brown paper bag that you would have gotten in the store at that time. Opens up. To a sort of a collage of various pieces of debris and ephemera from the store that also make allusions to the various aspects of the store, the historical context, and some of the more existential themes and creative struggles that I went through while I was making this work. Pages from self-help books that talk about crisis or fear or procrastination, excuse me. Things that I struggled with over the course of the 15 to 20 years that I spent making this work. And thankfully I feel through now, and I feel like I'm on the other side with the completion of this work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for walking us through this. I remember driving down Highway 61 in about 2007 on a honeymoon. And so it really brought back so many memories. And you couldn't help but notice the decay back then. And so I'm so glad that you were able to preserve it. But one thing that I'm really curious about is, and I think you kind of touched on this in a way, there's so many things that are specific to places and topics. For example, the rabbit's foot or the one Mississippi. Mm-hmm. And some things do get lost in translation. But for those of us who are working as photographers and we're finding ourselves in new places, and perhaps our time and spaces are limited. For example, I'm working on a project driving across the United States, meaning people who own a specific type of vehicle. So when our time is limited, what is our responsibility as photographers to really understand the background of the places that we're in when we're not devoting 20 years to a project around a certain place?
I think that seems to me to be something that's very dynamic and part of a complex equation that would consider the subject matter and its potential meanings. Your question brings me back to this work a little bit, and feeling as though, I mean, of course, there's a certain amount of research and knowledge that comes with a 20-year period, and meeting people and getting to know them and spending a lot of time in the same place. But I also felt a responsibility to do a certain amount of research on the store and the history of the Mississippi Chinese, and the town and the county and the state, and just going very, very deep, because and the importance of this only increased as time went on during this 20-year period that I was making this work, because it also, towards the end, sort of dovetailed not only with the pandemic and the very dystopian days of the pandemic, and the way that the store had a sort of dystopian look and feel to it. I mean, I clearly remember rushing into a grocery store with a mask on, I think it was Friday, March 13th, if that was the date. I mean, it should be a Friday the 13th, I don't know. And seeing nearly emptied shelves scattered with products, and immediately thinking of this. And it also dovetailed, again, with a very tumultuous time in America, socially, politically, for lack of a better or easier, quick and easy phrase, the George Floyd time. I don't know what we era, but definitely, a very, just very culturally and racially tumultuous time in America, and a new sort of and long needed greater reckoning with those issues. And here I was, a white photographer from New York City, now having moved back to New York City, going down into Mississippi, and not only spending time there, but in a Chinese American grocery store, and wanting to hold on to some aspects of that, not wanting to let go of the title, wanting to name the book after the place. That only felt right. I mean, I do have a certain fondness that I've for this place that's grown in me over the years, and a certain reverence for it, and putting the image of that place on the cover, I hope conveys that a bit. But yeah, I don't know what will happen as the work begins to get out into the world. I worried that there might be some knee-jerk responses or superficial reads saying, "Oh, Gong Co." But that's, again, there's a big difference between context and content, and where you take the work and how you shape it and direct it conceptually. Maybe making work that asks questions or inspires thought, but doesn't attempt to provide answers to some of these complex issues. And again, you've heard me speak about the work. You've had the advantage of that. But I hope that when people encounter this, you can judge a book by its cover, but you should also open it up and turn the pages. And I hope that when people do, they'll come away with a whole different idea of what this work is all about. So I don't know all of the details of what you're working on, or what the potential issues are, or what threads might run through it. But I do think it's a sort of a complex equation and considerations that's specific to each thing. Do you want to say more?
Well, so
That has already passed.
Already passed. So maybe this is something that you dealt with in that situation where people who are in a place like Memphis, which is very history, how do you go into a place like that as a photographer and make images that may be more than snapshots, that are more meaningful? Is it the role, of course there's production, there's research, there's all of that, but is it okay to have something be a beautiful image in and of itself? Or do you think that it is like the responsibility of the photographer to put in a effort and time and understanding to be able to enter an area that's incredibly complex? It's more, I'm asking more about your opinion than my specific.
Yeah, again, and I think I have the same answer, which is it all depends.
Yeah.
When I was in Memphis, a lot of my images had to do with music, less than some of the more, like, I don't know, charged aspects of Memphis and life there. But, yeah. I'd love to hear more about it.
I like the fact that there is a lot of white space in your book.
Oh, okay.
Very lot of white space. And
There is, yes.
sometimes you use one picture on the right side or on the left side, and don't know if I see it right, but the pictures seem to sink down. There is more white space over the picture. That's your intention?
Yes, and I'm not really sure what to say about that, except that it was really inspired by feeling, and it's a subtle difference. I mean, they're not hanging very low. They could be up high or down very low, but I don't know. I think there's just something about the energy of this place and this work and the sentiment of it and what we're seeing, what's happening, and the way that the work is about. In a way, it's about death, and that to me, I think that inspired the layout a bit. Of course, then you have other pictorial considerations when it comes to laying out a book. But yes, there is a lot of white space, and I guess I've always liked that. I've always liked that. The full bleed effect to me. I'm sure there are plenty of books that employ that and that I enjoy, but to me it rubs up against a more sort of editorial feel, because it's a type of treatment that you're even more likely to see in an editorial context in a magazine or something like that. And then the white space, it's, of course, people don't stop to think about it all that much, but it lends a sort of, I don't know, if this is probably not a good word for it, but like objectivity or separateness to the image. It is its own thing that exists on the page. It's not the page. It's not part of the page in the same way. It's a subtle signal.
And I was often reminded of William Christenberry.
Oh yes, I'm a big fan, and I had the good fortune of meeting him a few times when I worked with Eggleston. I didn't know he was going to be there that day, but I walked into the office and there's Bill and Bill. Yeah, and they were very good friends. I think lifelong friends from the time that they met. Christenberry inspired Eggleston to begin experimenting with color film during the time that they were both living in Memphis. Christenberry was teaching at a local college, and yeah, it's very sad that he's not around anymore. They're both really great artists and gentlemen. And I did, the second time I met Christenberry, he was doing a book signing at Aperture in New York, and we had met previously. He remembered me, and I like wordplay, so I asked him to sign my book to Christianberry from Christenberry, and he happily obliged.
Thank you so much for this amazing presentation.
Thank you.
I love the way you are explaining and giving clues and giving keys without saying too much. I had many questions before the beginning of your talk that I don't have anymore now. So thank you for answering to many of my questions. I would have a lot to say about nostalgia. I was thinking during your talk about this idea of nostalgia and how Walker Evans just aided the idea of nostalgia in his photographs. And there's this super interesting book by Svetlana Alpers, the last book that she published on Walker Evans, where she's speaking a lot about the way that Walker Evans was really aiding this idea of nostalgia. He was probably much more interested in melancholy than nostalgia. So I would love to have a discussion with you about about why for you nostalgia is important. But maybe that's not exactly what the direction we should move toward in this presentation. And so thank you so much for answering to many of my questions, but there is 2 questions for which I did not get an answer, and I would like to hear more from you about the presence of hands, of these dirty hands, probably yours in the book. I would love to hear more about that. And I would love also to hear more about the signs. You talked a bit about these signs that you apparently you designed them yourself. I remember that in a previous book you told me that you ask a sign painter to help you on that. So I would love to hear more about this, the way you design this sort of posters with this very specific typology, which is not really a graffiti, which is not really referring to the vernacular typography or typical signs that we found in the vernacular tradition of American signs. So I would love to hear about these 2 things, for which I have the feeling that I did not get any clues or any answers from you.
Thank you. Well, it's very interesting and fun for Clément Charot to be asking questions about, I think some of the least pictorially accomplished photographs, and then a non-photographic element in the book. So thank you, I appreciate that. I kind of stumbled into using words and phrases in my work. It became more of a presence in my work in Redheaded Peckerwood. I tend to work on these big projects over time in a sort of a novelistic way, employing research, keeping track of words and phrases, keeping notes of things that I see or that I hear or that someone might say in conversation. Over the course of time as I'm working on things, I collect these things. And then I feel compelled to do something with the ones that seem to relate well or ring true or shed their own sort of elusive light on the other content of a book or a project. And with Redheaded Peckerwood, I had these words and phrases that had come from that time or that I had even seen in some of the old press photographs and police photographs from that time. And I wanted them to look and feel from that time. And I actually took a sign painting course from one of the great living American sign painters, but it was just a weekend workshop, and I could never develop the hand for the skilled hand for that in the short amount of time that I needed to in order to get these signs made and get them into Redheaded Peckerwood. And so I found this another sign painter who was willing to execute my ideas. I designed them completely. I not only had the words and phrases, I selected the different types of strokes that I wanted, and the colors of the boards that they would be on, and things like that. But here with with the monotypes in Gong Co. I'm trying to think if you know what, I remember what it was. I remember where it started, and I'm going to reveal my source. I can't remember what year it was, but I went to MoMA to see the Claes Oldenburg sort of retrospective of his work from the 1960s. And in 1961, Oldenburg created something that he called the store. In 1961, he took over an old storefront on the Lower East Side of New York City and made an installation in the space that looked and felt very much like a store, but all of the inventory were his pieces, things that he had made, painted paper mache sculptures of pieces of pie and things like that. And he also staged a bunch of performances there. And to advertise the show, he made these signs that actually look similar to, I would say similar to these, but they're just they're much crazier and a little more out of control. And I went to that exhibition at MoMA, and I saw a few of those and thought these are wonderful, and I liked the way that they looked and felt. There's a primal kind of a feeling to them. There's a perfect imperfection to them, an artless artfulness to them. And so I was very inspired by that, and decided to experiment with making my own. I knew going into it that I wanted them to look and feel as if they could have come from the store, and imagined them as something that perhaps the store owner would have made just out of necessity, but without having the hand for it. The store owner isn't really present in this work. At one time, that was a path that I pursued and ultimately abandoned, and it was by taking that character out of it that it really effectively pushed me forward in the work, which I felt was helpful and also less problematic. But I wanted them to have this sort of slapdash quality and look almost as if something that I could have found buried in the back room of the store. And they're monoprints, and that means that it's the simplest of all ways of making a print. I wrote out these words and phrases backwards on a sheet of glass in my studio, and then took sheets of newsprint and just laid them down and lifted them up and did that over and over again, and would spray them with water and do it again and see what the result was. And I liked the result. And they function like the words and phrases in whatever way they're seen, either as these monoprints, which of course are big and bold and very readable, or the more cryptic and elusive marginalia, as I call it. They both function. I try to approach text as like breadcrumbs. You're leaving a trail behind of clues, I think is the word you used, but you're not really not doing anything more than that. You're still giving the viewer the opportunity to wander and wonder. And then to get to your question about these images of what I said were disembodied hands, it goes back to what I was saying about initially seeing the store as this treasure trove of products and objects that I thought I could photograph more easily, but then realizing that it was in fact very difficult. And this is just one of the solutions that I came up with, one of the devices. that I think also does something else in and of itself, because the disembodiment of these hands, they're not knowing whose hands they are or who they belong to. They're not mine, by the way. Okay. They could be mine, could they be the store owners? Does it really matter? They're floating in black space, and so we can't really pin that down either. They could have been made on site with a flash. They could have been made in the studio. I like the idea of both these photographs and even the monoprints and the marginalia, not really knowing who's responsible, not necessarily being able to pin down. The more that these things can float and not have answers, the more space there is for the viewer.
Thank you so much.